There's a lot going on, of course, within our city, within our state, within our nation. But because, I am the director at All Voting is Local, I look a lot locally and I try to do what I do. And we'll get into that about what I do and things of that nature. But overall, what's been going on is really trying to make sure that we have a process to ensure that August election and November election doesn't look like April, right? That's a real thing right now.
Yeah.
It's possible that we could have another spike in COVID cases. And if that's the case, we're trying to work with election officials to prepare now so that we don't have that as an issue.
And yeah, so it was a crazy fiasco, a couple of months ago with the voting. Like, how did that impact the work that you do?
Yes. So I work for an organization called All Voting is Local, and it's a national organization where we do work here within the states. I've been connected to voting work for just over going into 4.5 years. So the work that I do is pretty much all connected to voting, not necessarily voter registration, but the administration of voting. So how our elections are administered, how our elections are monitored. I look at that. So a lot of times when people ask me, like, what do you do? I typically will say, I'm kind of like the watchdog of our elections for the state. So when we had all that went on in April of this year, it impacted what we do pretty much in every way. We had just launched a campaign called And Still I Vote, and that campaign is up and running, but we launched it with a bunch of national influencers, and we had this whole plan how we were literally the week before we shut down, we had just visited a couple of sites here within the city where we were going to just put a lot of just investment and really build a lot of support around 3 local Black-owned, Black-operated, spaces or organizations within the community, and really tie art and voting in a real way, right? It's something that's been a passion of mine for a very long time. How do you connect art and voting? And so we were on that path, and we had this whole campaign. We literally had like an influencer, which I was so excited about, who's gonna come as well. And be here in person. But in the midst of that, COVID happened, and we literally had to pivot everything that we do. We had to figure out, like, how do we continue with the And Still I Vote campaign, as well as now, this was like 3 weeks before an election, 3 weeks before our April election. I had to figure out how do I build a coalition, educate the public around the election, keep up with all the lawsuits that were coming out of the election, and make sure that people know the process, which was a totally different process than we had ever voted by before, which was absentee ballots. So we had to do all of that in like 3.5 weeks, and it was a lot of work.
Yeah. I'm just thinking, like, by you sharing, I'm just like, my mind is just tight. Like, it's running, like, okay, how does she do this? And how does she do that within those 3 weeks and maintain your sanity, maintain your self-care and your wellness? And, how did you do that? What was that like in that time?
I am really good at setting boundaries. I was speaking with someone yesterday, and I told them that. I'm like, I've only been in this work, like I said, 4.5 years or so, but I've learned how to set boundaries. When I first came into the space where I was getting paid for the work, I should say, I've only been paid for the work for about 4.5 years. I've been working around voting and voter education stuff for, 10, 12 years now. I was doing it on my own, in my own free time prior to coming into the work where it became a way where income came from it. And so as a result of that, though, I learned very early to set boundaries. And so I would do things like, when I was off, I'm off. Like, you can't call me. I have this thing where I always say, if it burns down because I took off, that means that it was on fire when I was at work and I went down. Right?
It was already on fire.
It was already on fire. If it burns down while I was off, it was already on fire. And if no one else caught the fact that it was on fire, well, at this point, I'm taking some self-care, so that's not my issue. So I learned very early to just have that balance. So I do things like, I set my time, or I set my calendar where you can't even people who may have access to my calendar, or they may be able to see my calendar, or even folks who do not, they'll send a meeting invite, and my calendar is set for, I don't work during those times. So it'll automatically cancel the meeting request. So I've built.
You're very strict about it.
Yeah, I'm very strict about it. One, I have 2 children, and my children are older now, but when I first got into the work, I wasn't gonna let go
I'm so
of.
sorry.
What?
My phone.
Oh, that's fine. I was like, what's wrong? I didn't even hear it. No, I didn't even hear it. So I wasn't gonna let go of being a parent in order to do the work, right? I had to find my way to do what I'm passionate about, but also care for who I'm passionate about, right?
Right. Yeah.
So that was something that I learned early on. So there are times I do things like, well, pre-COVID, I should say, spa services. I'm a huge spa service advocate. I am not joking. Spa services, I do a lot of self-care. I do things where sometimes I'll just go and I can be here in the city and I'll just go rent a hotel room, and I'm just like, I just need to be out of my home, and my home is really peaceful. But sometimes it's just to be out of the space. So
how did you learn how to pull away? Because, as women, sometimes we struggle with that pull away. We're like going. Where did you learn that from?
I don't know that I have ever really had that problem. One of the things that for real, not many people know about me. So this will be, some people know, but because this will go public, people will find out. A lot of people don't know that in a lot of ways. Well, many people know that my parents passed away when I was young. So I was 9 years old. Many people know that. People don't necessarily know the in-between, what happened after my parents and what until I was 18 years old. In between time frame, I was raised in a lot of ways around a lot of men. It's just the fact of my life. And so my uncle, cousins, and I think about it today, I'm like, that's why I'm so comfortable around men, right? I understand the way men think in some ways, because I'm not a man, right? I have boys. So in my mind, there are certain ways that I was shaped, certain things that were shaped into my personality that comes a little bit more natural for me as a woman. And they lean more towards the strength of a man, and it is what it is. I just know that I am full-blown 100% woman. It just becomes a capacity within me that really just helps to govern leadership that I display.
Okay, gotcha. And so it just helps to balance you out. You just have a higher energy in some areas.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. So how did you get into this work that we see you doing today?
I fought my way here, like literally.
What's the motivation behind it?
So this has always been, policy has always been a passion of mine. I didn't know to call it policy. One of the things that I found, or one of the things that I remembered, when my parents, like I said, they passed when I was 9. One of my last birthday gifts that I asked my parents for was a judge's gavel. And really? 9 years old, just saying, like, I just want to make laws that make life fair for people. Like, I've always had this bent towards justice and this bent towards a care for people. And so it's always been a passion of mine to really govern society or help to govern society or do some type of, play some type of part in governing society where life becomes fair for those whom are impacted by that law, right? So when I became an adult, I had finished college, and this passion had really just kind of developed within me even more intensely, if you will, when I began to just do work on my own around voting and realizing so many of our people just don't understand basic voting processes. And so when I came into the work, like I said, when I first came into the nonprofit where I first started doing the work, what I realized is that a lot of what we do is very programmatic. Programmatic is great. It is phenomenal for the person who's trying to maintain. I wasn't trying to maintain. I was trying to change systems. And I'm like, if I can change systems, it's better for everyone. If I maintain programs, it's better for some. It was different. I just had a different mentality, a different theology around systems change.
Yeah, so you went into the work already knowing exactly how you wanted to move within the system.
Correct. Correct. I knew, like literally, I remember talking to, at the time, I was working with one of our, it was a comms director within the organization. And I looked at her, literally, I was 2 weeks in, and I looked at her and I said, you know what, if I'm still doing this in 5 years, I'm not doing something right. And she kind of looked at me. I said, I need to work myself out of a job. I said, and I promise you this, I'm going national. I said, I cannot do this on a local level. It's too small. We're too limited. Locally, I need to be able to go national. I need to bring national attention to how things are done within Wisconsin. And literally, like I said, it was 3.5 years, and I was already switching over to national.
Now that approach and that attitude of, I'm going full-fledged, this is what I want to do, this is how I want to do it. Did you have any type of pushback from your colleagues? What was that like?
Well, it wasn't pushed back directly from the individual whom I shared that, for sure. That person has been and was in that moment very supportive of me. I have received pushback from people within the work. People look sometimes and they think that you need to be in something for 15, 20, 30 years to be effective. And sometimes you do. I don't want to, act as though you don't need experience. You do need experience. My personal experience, that wasn't my case. In my personal experience, I'm driven. You have to remember, I went from having 2 parents to having no parents to trying to figure out life on my own, to literally being in a place of surviving, to coming to a place of thrive. And it's just, it's been a cycle, right? And so for me, I learned very quickly and very early to think my own thoughts and to think on my own, and whatever I see, to just go for it. And I either fail or I succeed. And it's all about, and even in the failure, I still succeed, because you either learn a lesson or, literally just, re-level up. So there, you never really fail, right?
Right.
That's the way my mind thought, at least. So that was kind of like the thing that kept me, that was the drive behind everything. There were times, especially there were certain spaces where there were individuals whom would see, because I carry presence. I know I have a big personality. I used to try to pull it back. I used to try to feel like, okay, Shauntay, settle down a little bit. And now I'm just like, it
is what it is.
Right. It's not my issue. If my personality makes you uncomfortable, it's your issue, right? And people in my life, particularly, I can think of one individual, they challenged me a lot. They would look and say little things like, well, you can go this place or you can go that place, and you're not going to find anything else that's like this. You're not going to find anything else that's this thing. Or, they would challenge me often. I mean, I've had people look at me and tell me, your face is out there too much. What do you mean my face is out here too much? Wow, you're in really high demand. Like, what do you mean? I'm trying to do any of this. I'm simply being authentically Shauntay, and whatever.
Those statements. So how were you able to take those statements in, but not take it in and allow it to affect your work?
I was able to do that because of the fact that I was raised with the understanding of, you don't quit. No matter what, you don't quit, you don't give up. It doesn't matter how much hardship, it doesn't matter any of that. Those are bumps on the road, and sometimes they're designed to be setbacks. They're designed to be those things that are to hinder us. But if we approach them right, they literally become stepping stones. They become our momentum.
Right.
And I'll be honest, even from a kid, I've never been the type of person that has responded well to control.
Okay.
Trying to control me, I don't respond well to that.
You weren't going for that.
Yeah, I either back up and I revamp how I'm proceeding, or I through. But it's going to be one or the other. But I do not respond. I'm not submissive when it comes to control. I always tell people, if you lead, I'll follow. If you try to control me, I'll rebel.
You were younger. Wasn't it an experience that you had that made you seek justice for people? First for yourself.
Yes, there was an experience.
Because when I think about when people are fighting for justice, fighting for equal rights, and I often ask myself, like, why are you so passionate about this? Or why are you so passionate about that? It comes from a place or an experience that, that pushed you and propelled you to say, I'm not going to let this happen to me or anyone else anymore.
Yep, that's exactly. So I can give two instances. I have to give a little bit of background to get to the two instances. So I have a family nickname, which really exemplifies my personality. I promise you it does. Sometimes I won't say it here because this will be live, but it is a family nickname and I don't want everyone calling me my nickname. But with the nickname, what I found is this. It is an expression of me as a person. I, as a person, by my most natural state of being. If I am just, I don't have anything else that I do, and I simply do that, I am a nurturer. It is who I am. I am a nurturer. I care for people. I love people. I can feel people. Sometimes I can be sitting in a space with people and I'll look at them and I'm like, I could literally feel their emotion. I've been like this since I was literally a kid, like 2, 3, 4 years old. I was like this. So that is important to know when to give the two situations. As I grew older, what I realized as well is at the time, I was the youngest girl in the family. So I was considered the baby.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes in Black families, we have what we consider to be they may not be our pick, but they come across as our pick, our children, right? And so although I believe my mom loved us all the same, there were certain things that I was able to get away with and I was able to do that I realized my siblings were not.
Mm-hmm.
I watched this for a number of years and I'm like, why does she treat me different? I didn't know anything about picks. I just knew that she treated me differently.
Yeah.
That, I was treated differently by so many in the family, aunts and uncles and, father, I was treated differently by so many people. And so that began to develop within me this bent towards, well, life should be fair. And so that was the start of it. I'm like, my loved ones shouldn't have to suffer. And I experienced something totally different.
Yeah.
It developed within me this fairness, this equity within me. I went to this community symposium, and the process of that, it was something about food share and the state of food share in Wisconsin. It was a really great symposium. However, the way that they presented the information was as though food share was the floor, the foundation by which no one can fall below in Wisconsin. And it was this big thing around how food share is very supportive and all of that. And I saw it differently.
Mm-hmm.
And so at the end of this time, they always ask for questions. And here I am, a little Black woman, raise my hand, ask a question. They bring the mic over to me. And I thank the person for the information that they provided. And I said, I understand that food share is a foundation by which people can stand on.
Mm-hmm.
However, would you also not say in Wisconsin that it's a ceiling? Because once you hit an income limit and you go $10 over that income limit, you have to make a decision as to whether or not you want that promotion or you want that raise or you want to put your children in childcare.
Mm-hmm.
Do you stay where you're at? I said, so
stay where you're at. Mm-hmm.
Where they are. And literally, and I didn't say it in this way, that was the synopsis of how I asked the question. He literally looked and said, oh, we have a troublemaker. And the room erupts with laughter, and he never answered my question. And I vowed that I would never let a person silence me again.
So those two were like defining moments in your life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Did it like with that moment with him and him not responding, it didn't shut you down. It actually just ignited something in you.
Exactly. That's exactly what it does, which is what I said when I said, you remember I said control.
Right.
I don't respond well to control.
Yeah.
Well, I shouldn't say I don't respond well. I don't respond average from a place of average to control. So I either will back up and rework my situation or I plow through.
Mm-hmm.
Ignited the push within me, that ignited what within me, the personality where I looked and I'm like, oh, okay. So now I'm going to show you.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't get to it, which was a policy question. So now I'm going to show you.
Mm-hmm.
And in the policy, it wasn't it wasn't the easiest path to take because there are very few Black women who are either connected to policy or in policy. And there are a lot of, I don't want to say it like there aren't Black women who know about policy.
Mm-hmm.
Actually be a person who says, I'm going to become a lobbyist. There are
Right.
not a lot of them. There just aren't a lot of them.
Yeah, let's get to that because that's what you do. And, you know, you're one of the few, and you train African-American people, people of color that look just like you, to do the work that you do, to get more understanding around policy and how elections work and voting. And so, you know, this troublemaker that you are.
Hey, someone has to be one.
Somebody say that you're training other troublemakers.
Hey, you know, troublemakers are not a bad thing. They're not a bad thing. Troublemakers sometimes can. I often say this. We make a decision daily. I posted this the other day as well. We make a decision daily to either be an initiator or an instigator.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the difference between an initiator and an instigator is that one catches fire, or one has causes a rippling effect, right? Which is basically that initiator. And so being a troublemaker, they both can ignite, right? And you know, both situations can ignite. But being a troublemaker, sometimes you need to stir up trouble, because I am an advocate where I feel like I shouldn't maintain limitation.
Mm-hmm.
Shouldn't maintain limitation. When I see that there's a place of limitation, I feel like that's a part of who I am. There's something within me where I'm just like, yeah, that's too limiting. And when it's limiting, the strength.
And I think that's what we get from you. Like, you know, in my conversation with you, it's like you're very direct, but not in a disrespectful way.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's like, you're like, okay, this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to get it done. And you're going to find the loopholes. You're going to figure it out.
Absolutely.
And that's what we need, especially in the work that you do.
Right. You have to. I mean, and not being in the workforce, I mean, you know, not having been in the work for so long, I think just being honest about coming into a space where you really I didn't have relationships. I didn't know a lot of people. I didn't know a lot of things. And my thought process was, I'm going to find my lane. And if there's no lane for me, I'll create one. Stay there.
Say that again.
I'm going to find my lane.
Mm-hmm.
And if there is no lane for me, I will create one, and I'm going to stay there. And no matter what has come my way, I mean, people come to me all the time and are like, do you want to do this? And do you want to do that? And I literally, while they're talking to me, I do like an internal reflection. And I'm like, is that a part of my lane? If it's not, I don't care what it's connected to. I don't care how much finances are tied to it. It's not a part of my lane.
Yeah.
I am going to do it well because it's not a part of my lane.
So let me, before you just dive into more about your lobbying, why do you think we as women, we get caught up in other lanes? And we know, like, this is our lane, but we get sidetracked and we see, ooh, that looks pretty tempting. Ooh, this much money, you know, I can make this much money over here, or this person is over here. Why do we get caught up?
Women, very similar to men, have a desire to feel appreciated, right? In this way, we have a desire to be appreciated, to be seen as individuals who are set apart and who can do things differently. And sometimes within spaces, I think, whether it is a woman who is successful or a woman who is coming into success, however we define success, right? I think what happens is we don't take enough time to really consider who we are. I think that's a shortfall, that's a downfall within women. I often say, I use a lot of like short, snappy, little cliche-ish type terminology. And I'll say things like, you don't know the me I know. Because people don't really, like, I know me better than anyone knows me, right?
Better than anyone else.
Right. And so because I've taken the time, I took literally 2 years and I did nothing but relearn who is Shauntay Nelson.
Yeah.
literally, I did nothing else. I did not date. I didn't do any 2 years. And I was just like, I'm not doing anything else except finding out who is Shauntay.
I think that's so powerful, and I think it's needed. I can definitely relate to taking the time to know who you are, especially when you are doing work where you're out in front.
Yeah.
People are watching you, looking at you, and you know, you want to make sure that you're the best representation of yourself.
Right. And this, if you're aspiring to be a person who's out in front, and there's nothing wrong with that aspiration, right? So if you're aspiring a person to be out in front, it is imperative that you take time to find out who you are, because we get into this space where I call it public facing, where we become public facing people. Literally everyone's pulling at you. I cannot tell you sometimes how much my phone rings throughout the day, or text messages come through, or Facebook pings. And I literally, if I don't know me, I will be all over the place. And I think to your question earlier, like, why do I think women get off that track? We get pulled away and we get pulled into so many things. I think it's because we, like women, we're by nature, like I said, we have a need to feel as though we are taking care of someone, taking care of a situation, right? So because of that, we want to kind of be the solutionist, if you will.
For
Right?
everything.
For everything.
For
and
everything.
Sometimes I'm the problem. I'm not the for that. I can go in trying to create a solution and create a bigger problem.
Yeah.
I have to be okay with saying, you know what, I can't lead that, but I can support it.
Yeah. Yeah. So back to your lobbying work.
Yes.
And you know, you're training and you're training up other troublemakers.
Yes. Hey.
Yeah. So how does that work fulfill you? How does that bring joy to you?
It brings joy because I love seeing growth. I love to see an individual and it doesn't have to be like they are immature in their personality, but just maybe in some infancy stages of their leadership, right? Where I could look and I could see maybe the gap. You talked earlier about how we'll find that gap, right? That's one of my strengths. When I'm talking with people, I try to find out, like, where am I needed? So as I'm speaking, I find my own value in. And then if they don't see it, I'll show them that value within their life. Like, that's kind of like my motto. And so when I'm thinking about training people, it fulfills me because I can literally see an individual who may have maybe come into a component of their leadership and they were afraid, or they were cautious, or they were a little hesitant. And literally the way that I try to do it, I'm not perfect at it, but the way that I try to do it is I try to coach that person, not lead that person. There's a difference. Coach you into the fullness of who you are so that I invite you into your leadership. Difference.
Yeah.
If I show you that you're a leader, then you always, I become an enabler of you, and you always depend on me to show you that. If I invite you into your own leadership, then you develop that leadership according to your personality, and then you can stand in your own strength.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. So who coaches you? Who's the person for you?
I have plenty of individuals coaching me. I always say this: no matter how much of a leading role I am in, I always, every time, sometimes we say we become elevated. We move from, place to place. We're elevated in our leading. We're elevated in our maybe work style. However, I always find a place, or a person, not a place. I always find a person whom I can be accountable to. So I have people who coach me around the strength of my personality. If you would have met me maybe about 7 or 8 years ago, I'm already a strong personality. I have strength of personality. However, I'm hoping that the strength of personality is also very approachable. I try to be very approachable. I wasn't always that way. I wasn't always the person whom was approachable. You only saw the strength. You saw the leadership, and I'm still like that. I'm a no nonsense person, but I was very, very no nonsense to the point of rudeness. Like it would just be like, you know what, I don't have time for you, and I just keep going. It was very rude. I've in this self-awareness phase of my life,
Yeah.
started looking, and I internally, not that anyone even knew, and maybe they did, but I started saying, you need to soften who you are, Shauntay. Like, you have strength, and that will always be what you'll have. But if I used to tell myself, if I would go into every situation with the fullness of the strength by which I carry, I turn a lot of people off, and I cause people to disengage before they even meet me.
Mm-hmm.
My thought process was, and I'm still in the process of softening myself. Sometimes I still say something a little too sharply. Sometimes I still say something a little too bluntly.
Mm-hmm.
As I'm not perfect, but
Yeah.
it's a process.
Yeah. Yeah. Now I know you are a woman of faith. We've also shared conversations in that, and we relate in that way. How does
Yes.
your faith walk? How does that come into play to everything that you do, and how does that balance you out? And how does that even help you for that softness?
Yes. So that plays a large component in why, and my why behind even looking to say you need to soften your approach and soften who you are, Shauntay. So one of my desires, when you talk about faith, of course, like you said, I'm a woman of faith. And so just in that, what I realize is that in a lot of ways, sometimes in people whom are connected to, sometimes, not all times, sometimes people who are connected to faith groups, when we have strength of personality, women, when we have strength of personality, that strength of personality shows up as anointing. And that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. But I started looking at my life saying, I want my greater anointing to be love.
Mm.
Earth. I want people to say she was one of the greatest expressions of the love of Christ that I've ever experienced in the earth.
Yes, I too
Oh,
can relate. I too can
yes.
relate. We share the same
Mhm.
thought on that particular topic, that particular, yeah, we do. We share the same thing.
Yes. Yes. So that is how I approach everything.
And that's work, isn't it?
It's work.
It
It's
takes
work
work.
because it helps when someone triggers me. And you can, if you once you get to know me, you can really tell, like, oh, she got triggered. She got, and some, because by nature, one of the things because I'm strong, so by nature, I can, I have this thing like, you're not gonna punk me.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about being punked. It's more so about just understanding how to find that balance,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when I'm triggered, I find myself, we have this, everyone has it. We have fight, flight, or flee
Yeah. Yeah.
part of our, or freeze, flight, fight, um, flight, flight, or freeze.
Yeah, I can't remember the order.
Right. No. It's just, you can do either of how they respond, how you respond. And when I was younger, my natural response, or my automatic response, I should say, was fight. Ugh. I would run into a fight in a minute, not literally with my fists. I'm not a fist fighter, but I'll fight with this. And
Mm-hmm.
and so that was my natural response, or my immediate response. And I've grown to this place where now when I'm triggered, I freeze. It's so amazing because I freeze in my activity, but in my mind, I'm still fighting.
Right. Yeah.
I literally do like a mental reset in that space.
Mm-hmm.
And that helps me to refocus and to think, is the response you're about to give a response of love?
Mm-hmm.
You literally getting ready to tear this person down, or are you getting ready to build this person up? And so typically someone pointed this out to me, and I was like, oh, I guess I do that. Typically when something happens, I'll flinch, and I usually tilt my head to the side. That's kind of literally, it's like a triggering moment for me. I'll flinch, and I'll do something where you can usually, if you're close, if you notice me, and now everyone will know, but you'll notice that I'll typically kind of do a little bit of a flinch, and
Mm-hmm.
a squint of my eyes, a flinch, and I'll tilt my head to the side. Or I'll do something like I'll get into a blank stare. because I'm restraining myself.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
and I'm like, that
You're
just
like,
happened.
1, 2, 3.
Right? Like, that just happened. And that helps me to respond in love, to think, to say, love, Shauntay, love, love, love. So when I think about how faith impacts my work, how faith impacts how I handle this work, when I've been in situations where people have challenged me, one of the things the scriptures that would always come to my mind is, bless your enemies, bless those who despitefully, do harm against you, right? So those whom may have it out for me. I remember one time I was literally, because I love prayer. Anyone who knows me knows I will break out into prayer in a minute. It's just who I am, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there would be times I would be praying for folks whom I consider to be just kind of like a contentious relationship. And literally I would find myself praying and asking God, bless them with a promotion, bless
Mm-hmm.
them out of my life.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to tear them up. You don't, that's not even right. Like,
Yeah.
it's not even faith based. That's not even biblical to look
Right.
and
Yeah. It's
I
not
mean,
fake.
right. It's just not it. It's not it. So I'm not going to position myself where I try to wish harm on a person. What
Mm-hmm.
I'd rather happen is that you are so blessed until you literally no longer have to deal with me. You don't even interact with me anymore.
Right. Yeah.
Literally, I start praying things like, oh God, give them a promotion.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, in such a way until literally they don't even
It
think
don't
about
bother me anymore.
because it's not, we get to the same solution, right? I want them out of my life. And so why not just make sure that they can have success as they exit my life?
Mm. Yeah. Beautiful.
It doesn't hurt me any.
Mm-hmm. It doesn't.
Not.
It doesn't. So what are we doing now? In a couple of months, it's going to be election time. As the community, what should we be doing to prepare ourselves?
We should be very, very, we should be making a plan. We know in the next couple of months there are elections. We have 2 elections coming up, one on August 11th,
Mm-hmm.
Wisconsin, and then one on November 3rd in Wisconsin. We know one of the things that I've been sharing with everyone whom I have a conversation with, we need to be preparing, whether it is one or not, for another spike in COVID-19 cases.
Mm-hmm.
The case, we will be in a very similar situation potentially, where we will have potentially a stay-at-home order. If that is the case, we have to figure out how we're going to cast our ballot in both August and in November. I could see it possibly happening closer to November than August, but hey, it's possible. And so the thing that I would encourage people to do is have a plan, have a voting plan. Are you going to be an individual whom will vote in the August election? I'm hoping yes. In the November election, I'm hoping yes. And if your decision is yes, then are you going to vote by requesting an absentee ballot?
Mm-hmm.
Which you can do by visiting myvote.wi.gov, myvote.wisconsin.gov. And so you can request a ballot there. Another way that people will be able to vote, we typically, specifically in Milwaukee, would have 6 weeks of early voting. We are going to have 2 weeks of early voting because the Seventh Circuit Appeals Court ruled that we cannot, in the state of Wisconsin, have longer than 2 weeks of early voting. So we're going to have 2 weeks. I know in Milwaukee, there's a plan to have 16 early voting sites. So that is expansion. That's something that myself and other groups worked in collaboration with the election officials to ensure that we went from, in 2016, we had 3. In 2018, we had 8. And I was asking for 15, 16 in 2018. We just didn't have the budget for it.
Okay.
Of course, and I asked really late in the budget process. That was real. I asked very late. It was like,
because in April, was it like 5 or 6?
Yeah, that was nothing to do with, that had everything to do with COVID and the numbers. And so just being prepared. Like if it happened once, it's possible that it can happen again. We're hoping it won't. We're hoping it won't. We're hoping it won't. But it's possible, right? And so working with officials to ensure that our elections throughout the state of Wisconsin are run without a glitch and without a hitch, working very closely with Milwaukee as best as we can right now, where we try to ensure that individuals receive their absentee ballots whom have requested them, as well as we have a really robust plan for early voting.
Okay.
And then the third way that people can vote, of course, is on election day, as well as in the state of Wisconsin. If you've moved and you've moved, like say for instance, if I move today, I will be, and I've not stayed at I've stayed at my space over 28 days. So I shouldn't say I moved today. Let's say it is August 1st and I move for August. I move into a new property in August. I, as a person, should be prepared to register, to re-register on election day, because you won't be able to do it until election day, because you have to live in your space for 28 days. It used to be 10. There was another change that happened with this ruling of the appeals court. 10, now it's 28 days.
And this is the talk. This is that we don't know. We don't often know or often hear about. We're just often told to go vote.
And these are the things that on behind the scenes that we're working on.
Yeah.
I want to make sure that people have a plan. The last day to register to vote in the state of Wisconsin online only, will be the 22nd of July. So that's just under 3 weeks from yesterday, I think, something of that nature. Yeah, about 3 weeks from yesterday. So that's the last day to register to vote. The last day to request an absentee ballot, I want to say, is August 6th. That's the Thursday before the August 11th election in the state of Wisconsin. You can do those online. As I stated, you can always register to vote in person on election day, or if you go to vote early, which is really in-person absentee voting. But if you go to early vote, you can register to vote during early voting as well.
So I know often you hear the question, because you've been doing this for a while, why should I vote? Does my vote count?
Yes.
Does it matter? And then, you often have celebrities who are encouraging their followers, their listeners to vote. But why should we vote?
We should vote because voting is basically the foundation of every activity that we experience, enjoy, don't like. It is the foundation for everything, for the movement of society. Voting is foundational to the movement of society. So I usually, because my son went through that when he turned 18, like, Mama, why does it matter? Why should it care? Why should I care? And I said, hey, that cell phone in your hand? And he's like, yeah. I said, it's legislators who make the laws that govern how much you can use that cell phone, or whether or not 5G networks are able to be put in our community, or whether or not you can have this amount of text messages, or whether you have access to certain things under the age of 18. I said, hey, that vehicle that you drive, it is government who determines where a stop sign goes. It is government who determines the speed limit. Speed limits can be changed on streets, right? It's government who determines how signage is placed and how long an entryway on a freeway is, or an exit on a freeway is. Like, everything is determined by government.
By government.
And so,
and we don't look at it like that. And I think, and I know, because you're doing this work, we have to start looking at it like that. The language has to be taught to us like that in order for it to click.
Yeah.
Especially for our youth, for younger generations, to say, okay, this is why I should be voting.
Right. Little things like whether or not we have parking meters, whether or not we have a parking ticket, things like where we can park and where we can't park. When we go and maybe we're attending an event, right? Can you park this lot or can you not? It may seem like it is a policy that was implemented by that organization, but that organization can only implement that policy because government says that they can. If government says they can't implement that policy. So everything, it is the foundation by which activity happens in society.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I'm a voter, by the way.